Your wife thinks it's a waste of money. Your colleagues raise an eyebrow when you mention it. Your kids think it's a little funny that dad gets more excited about his new tools than about the family vacation. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder if they're right. Is there something wrong with a 45-year-old man who stays up until midnight building a model engine? Who spends 3 weekends restoring a motorcycle nobody asked him to restore? Who loses himself completely in a strategy game while the rest of the world disappears? Here is what the science actually says. Not only is there nothing wrong with you, what you are doing may be one of the healthiest things a man in the modern world can do. Today, we're going to look at the real psychology behind why men never truly outgrow their toys. Not to justify it, not to give anyone permission, but because the science here is fascinating, and it says something important about what men actually need that the modern world almost never gives them. Let's start with something that might sound familiar. You spend an entire week at work. Meetings, emails, reports, calls. You put in the hours, you do the work. And at the end of Friday, what exactly do you have to show for it? A slightly fuller inbox? A presentation that will be revised 6 more times? This is not laziness. This is not ingratitude. This is a very specific psychological problem that affects millions of working men, and it has a name. Psychologist Albert Bandura at Stanford University spent decades studying what he called self-efficacy, a person's belief in their own ability to act and see results. His research showed something critical. Human beings don't just need to work. They need to see a direct, visible, undeniable connection between what they do and what happens next. And that connection, in modern office life, is almost completely broken. You can write a report that disappears into a system. You can attend a meeting that produces another meeting. You can contribute to a project whose outcome you will never personally witness. The feedback loop, the thing that tells your brain, you did this and this happened because of you, simply doesn't exist. Now think about what happens in the garage. You replace the brake pads. The car stops better. You did that. Nobody took credit for it in the quarterly review. Nobody asked you to justify the methodology. You put your hands on something broken, and now it works because of you and only you. That is not a hobby. That is your nervous system getting something it has been starved of all week. Have you ever been so absorbed in something that you looked up and 2 hours had passed? You weren't tired, you weren't bored, you weren't thinking about your mortgage or your emails or that awkward conversation from Tuesday. You were just completely there. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and yes, that last name is famously impossible to pronounce, called this state flow, and he spent his entire career studying it. Flow happens when a task is exactly right, difficult enough to demand your full attention, but possible enough that you can actually do it. Too easy and your mind wanders, too hard and you shut down, but right in the middle, that narrow corridor where skill meets challenge, something remarkable happens in the brain. Research published in the journal Nature confirmed what Csikszentmihalyi suspected. Complex skill-based activities triggered dopamine release in the brain. Video games, mechanical work, strategic simulations, all of them. And the dopamine response is comparable to achieving real-life goals. Not scrolling social media, not eating junk food, real goals. For a man between 35 and 55 whose brain spent decades being trained to solve problems, to build things, to figure out how systems work, modern routine life often provides almost none of this. The reward system sits idle, untriggered, waiting. And then he sits down with a model kit or fires up a simulator, and suddenly every circuit in his brain that was designed to be engaged is fully, completely, joyfully engaged. That's not escapism. That is the brain finally doing what it was built to do. But there is also something else happening, something older and quieter, something that goes all the way back to childhood. Here is something worth noticing. When men return to their toys in adult life, they almost never choose something completely new. They go back back to the same cars they dreamed about at 12, back to the same type of games they played at 14, back to the same mechanical fascination that had them taking apart the family radio at 9 years old and not quite knowing how to put it back together. This is not coincidence. This is neuroscience. Between the ages of roughly 8 and 14, the human brain goes through an intense period of passion formation. The things that captivated you during that window, the things that made time disappear, that made you forget to eat, that made you stay up past your bedtime, those experiences are encoded in memory with an unusually strong dopamine signature. Neuroscientists call this the reminiscence bump for emotional memory. In other words, the memories from that period of life carry more emotional weight than almost anything that comes after. When an adult man reconnects with those same activities, his brain doesn't just remember them, it re-experiences something close to the neurological state of that original fascination. The 14-year-old who was obsessed with engines doesn't disappear when the man turns 40. He just goes quiet for a few decades. And when the adult finally gives him space, in the garage, in the study, late at night in front of a screen, he comes back with everything he had. This is not regression. This is continuity. The same brain, the same curiosity, the same need to understand how things work. The toy changed. The person didn't. There is one more dimension to this that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important one. Sociologist Ray Oldenburg introduced a concept called the third place. First place, home. Second place, work. Third place, somewhere else entirely. A space where you are not a husband, not an employee, not a father, not a provider. Just yourself. For previous generations, this was the barbershop, the pub, the bowling alley. Physical places where a man could exist without a role, without an obligation, without anyone needing anything from him. For many men today, that third place is a garage, a gaming chair, a workshop in the basement, a corner of the home that belongs, quietly, unofficially, only to him. And research supports what common sense already suspects. Physical engagement with complex tasks, assembling, restoring, building, even the simple tactile focus of working with your hands measurably reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, more effectively than passive rest, more effectively than watching television, more effectively than most things we typically recommend to stressed adults. When a man loses himself in his workshop for 3 hours on a Saturday, he is not hiding from his family. He is not being selfish. He is doing something his nervous system urgently needs, decompressing from a week of being everything to everyone and becoming, for a few quiet hours, just a person who is good at something he loves. Now, the shadow side of this is worth naming honestly. When the workshop becomes a way to permanently avoid the family, when the third place becomes the only place, that is a different conversation. But that is an exception, not the rule. For most men, this space is not an escape from life. It is what makes the rest of life possible. In 1938, the Dutch philosopher Johann Huizinga wrote a book called Homo Ludens, which translates simply as man the player. His central argument was radical for its time and remains underappreciated today. Play is not something we outgrow. It is not a childhood phase we leave behind when we become serious adults. Play, Huizinga argued, is one of the primary foundations of human culture, of creativity, of meaning itself. The ability to enter a world with its own rules, its own goals, its own internal logic, and to engage with it completely and voluntarily is not a symptom of immaturity. It is one of the defining qualities of a fully alive human being. The man who spends his Sunday rebuilding a carburetor is not avoiding adult responsibility. He is practicing something ancient and necessary, the construction of small, understandable, honest worlds inside a larger world that is often none of those things. Because here's the truth that modern life rarely admits. Most of adult responsibility is ambiguous. You can do everything right and still fail. You can work hard and still be passed over. You can love your family completely and still not know if you're doing enough. But the engine either runs or it doesn't. The model either fits together or it doesn't. The game either rewards your strategy or it punishes your mistakes. Cause and effect, clear and immediate. In a world of constant uncertainty, that clarity is not trivial. It is deeply, genuinely nourishing. We should stop pathologizing men for needing this. We should stop calling it a midlife crisis or an expensive hobby or a refusal to grow up. Because the difference between a boy and a man is not that one plays and the other doesn't. It's only in the price of the tools. The goal was always the same: to understand how something works, to build something real, to feel for at least a few hours that you are genuinely capable in a world that makes that feeling very hard to come by. If someone in your life has a workshop, a simulator, a garage full of something you don't quite understand, maybe the best thing you can do is not ask them to explain it. Just let them have it. This has been Psychology Unfiltered. Subscribe for more honest dives into the science of how we actually work. And we'll see you in the next one.